Is Keir Starmer the heir to Margaret Thatcher? Will planes take off for Rwanda? And do fossil fuels have a role in meeting net zero? This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, Shadow Defence Minister Labour's Luke Pollard, Guardian columnist George Monbiot and Lucy Harris from the free market think tank The Growth Commission. On today's programme.
We want to make sure that we can send people to Rwanda. It's a massive deterrence, we know, for people making those crossings.
Would a new treaty and sending British lawyers to Rwanda allow the flights to begin? The government's also expected to raise the minimum worker visa salary in curbs to legal migration. We'll bring you the latest.
The government of the UK now is seemingly, maybe I'm wrong, but they seem to be in the pocket of the fossil fuel companies.
But do fossil fuels have a role in the transition to net zero?
The system is rigged to prevent the reporting and investigation of serious incidents.
A BBC investigation reveals how water companies can make sewage pollution disappear from the official figures.
We're leaving Downing Street for the last time.
And should Keir Starmer have praised Margaret Thatcher's legacy? Well, let's start with that final story you just heard. The Sunday Telegraph headline, Starmer heaps praise on Thatcher as he woos Conservative voters. My opening question for the panel, starting with you, Tobias, is Keir Starmer the heir to Margaret Thatcher?
I think I'm amazed you're even asking this question to hear that Starmer is trying to relate himself to Thatcher. This is all about him saying, I am not Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, what next? Adam Smith or Edmund Burke or Ronald Reagan? Who's going to be quoted next? I think this is all a little bit of a bluff just to provide distance between where the Labour Party was back in 2019.
Luke? Is he the heir to Margaret Thatcher?
No. And he wasn't really praising Margaret Thatcher either. He was saying that we need to have a transformative government in the way that Attlee, Blair and indeed Thatcher transformed Britain. Now, I'm no fan of Margaret Thatcher, right? But there's no denying that the effects of her policies was transformative. Now, I have a view as to whether that is good or bad, and you can probably imagine what that is. But we need a transformative government after the next general election. That was the point that Keir was making, rather than the 13 years of drift that we've got at the moment. There's no clear direction from Rishi Sunak. And Keir was saying in his article and in the media interviews since that we need a government with a clear direction, with a clear set of ambitions, with a clear focus, especially on getting our economy moving.
George, what do you think?
He's not trying to woo Conservative voters. He's trying to appease the billionaire press. That is the permission slip which any Labour leader needs, is to make sure that Rupert Murdoch and Lord Rothermere and Barclay...
Well, in order to win.
In order to win. And it's a profoundly undemocratic situation that this handful of billionaires have got their fingers around the throat of politics in this country.
I mean, he said in the article, Lucy, that Margaret Thatcher had set loose our natural entrepreneurialism during her time as Prime Minister, and, as Luke was saying, that Margaret Thatcher, as well as others, Tony Blair and Clement Attlee, were examples of how politicians can affect meaningful change. So is he the heir to Margaret Thatcher?
I mean, it's a nice try, isn't it? I don't think he is. The proof is in the pudding. Let's see what he puts out later on today with his new economic plans. But if it's higher taxes, which I think is inevitable in the current economic climate, how can he possibly align himself with Margaret Thatcher when she was so concerned about cutting taxes and growing?
Right. I mean, and she didn't do that, of course, all the way through, but you're absolutely right. Let's talk about the economy and spending, because he is giving a speech later today. The Guardian has this headline, Keir Starmer, Labour won't turn on spending taps if it wins election. Keir Starmer to warn that Britain is in worse economic state for over 50 years and spending will need to be constrained. So what's this radical transformative government that Keir Starmer will lead? It'll be exactly the same as the Tory government we've got now.
No, it really won't. What we've said is that we will match spending commitments for a period at the start of a parliament as we seek to fix the economy and grow it, because the growth of the economy is where the additional taxes that come from more people being in work, the economy cycling faster.
How long will that take, the growth fairy appearing?
Well, the economic growth that we're hoping for will appear, I hope, at the start of a parliament when you see changes in policies like reducing the NHS waiting lists. Because at the moment, people can't deliver economically productive lives if they're stuck at home waiting for an NHS operation, for instance. So that's how we're looking at cycling the economy faster, creating more growth, because it is only in that economic growth that we can get the taxes that we need to fix the NHS, to make sure that we're getting our schools back where they should be, and to address the climate crisis.
I mean, you, of course, haven't found any growth anywhere under successive Tory governments, particularly not for this year and next. It's been revised right down. You really are handing over a mess, aren't you, to Labour if they win? Well,
it takes us back to what we inherited as well. And when we talk about 13 years, people do gloss over some of the big seismic events that took place, global events such as COVID, such as Ukraine and so forth. Half of our GDP is affected by international headwinds. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm simply saying whoever would be in charge would have to deal with those situations. What we saw in the last budget, though, was an £11 billion commitment to actually invest in growth. We recognise that we're not growing fast enough. Productivity is what this country should be doing better. We're behind Germany, and what we're actually providing clarity on is let's be that high-tech superpower. Let's invest in what we're good at. Pharmaceuticals, life sciences, creative industries, AI. These are the sort of things that in a fast-changing, competitive world we can do well. And that's why the Chancellor is investing and getting also our pension funds to invest here in the UK, not abroad.
But this is after 13 years. What would the Growth Commission suggest?
Well, I think, you can't tax your way to growth. I think that's an obvious one for the books. But what we have suggested, and we launched our most recent paper, the growth budget, back last month, right next to the autumn statement. And what we said is that if you are to do a series of plans, and the majority of our plans came from re-regulation and alternative ways of viewing regulation, you can actually get a significant amount of growth that would equal to about 23% increase in GDP per capita in 2044, which is a long-term look at the economy. It is a very long-term look at the economy, but it is a way of being able to fund things that you need to be able to fund in the long term. So it's a different way of doing things, and that's what we do at the Growth Commission.
What do you make of that headline that says Labour won't turn on spending taps if it wins election? Disappointed?
It's absolutely tragic. A couple of weeks ago in The Guardian, I rashly attempted to work out what the deficit is across all public services in the UK, what it would take to bring a functioning state with functioning public services back, and it's about 100 billion a year of extra spending would be required. Now, you can do that by, for instance, raising capital gains tax to bring it to equality with income tax. There's a series of...
That wouldn't raise 100 billion.
That wouldn't by itself raise 100 billion, but there are a series of much fairer taxes which would be redistributive, as well as raising that revenue. But we absolutely need to bring back robust public spending on the right things if we're going to have a functional state in this country.
Luke?
Well, I think we do need to get growth back in the economy. There's not a solution to any one of our public services. And let's face it, we're going into an election next year where nearly every single one of our public services is broken. Seriously broken.
Are you going to be able to find £100 billion necessary, George says, to fund public services?
Well, I haven't seen George's figures, and I'm going with the ones that Rachel Reeves works out rather than that George works out.
How much does she think we need?
What we've said is we'll match the Tory spending plans for the first few years to create the growth that creates the investment that we need to then put the investment in.
Borrow £28 billion a year on top of where we are as well.
By midway through the Parliament, to address the climate crisis, the most pressing crisis, and to create the jobs we need, by midway through the Parliament...
Our debt interest is actually twice the defence budget, but you want to increase the amount of borrowing by adding £28 billion
to create the clean jobs of the future. I'm afraid we're not seeing that happen under the current government. We've set out a clear ambition of this. We will, by the midway through Parliament, be investing £28 billion a year in the clean jobs, in the good paid jobs that will create the economic growth that we need in the future.
You borrow more money, interest rates will then go up, the cost of borrowing will then go up as well. That'll add to the challenge of actually making...
So you would have voted against Jeremy Hunt then cutting national insurance. You should have put that
money,
not at all.
This actually goes to a fundamental... This is different from borrowing £28 billion to cutting some of those taxes...
You could have reduced borrowing.
If I can finish, that when you reduce some taxes, you can actually inspire an economy to work to actually be more productive.
But you do admit you could have used that money and reduced the borrowing.
Possibly, but what we want to do is actually to promote growth. I've just said, where does that money actually going to? That 11 billion is going to actually invest in British business.
All right, hang on, let Lucy
By increasing it to 20 billion, you're seeing the amount of spending that we had post 2009 with the economic crash. You're seeing the amount of spending post COVID. That would equate you to doing something similar by printing money or to do something like that, which is inflationary. So I don't understand how you are going to fund £20 billion worth of spending without doing something like that, which would be inflationary and would be in a similar situation as we are in.
I'll get Luke to answer, then I'll come back to you, George.
Well, what we've set out very clearly is that the 28 billion will be investment in our green industries to reduce our carbon, but also to create the green jobs in the future. It's not just spending money, it's leveraging money from the private sector. For every £1 we spend, we think there'll be 3 generated from the private sector. So this is about the economic transformation of our country, because over 13 years, our growth is appallingly low compared to our near neighbours. It's not providing the public sector with the funds it needs to invest, to correct the damage that we've seen from the past decade. That's why we've got to be different. But the idea that we can simply bury our heads in the sand,
well,
the tax burden's the highest it's been for 70 years, where debt is the highest it's ever been, I'm afraid what's happening with the Tories is not working. Britain is not working under the Conservatives.
Well, let's just pick one department. You were referring to figures across all public spending. Let's have a look at defence. Financial Times, UK armed forces face £17 billion black hole in equipment budget. It's a damning report by the National Audit Office, and it's because of soaring costs and inflation. How's this managed to happen, Tobias? You used to be head of the Defence Select Committee.
We need to invest in defence and make it really clear. I connected our GDP to the international headwinds. Look what happened in Ukraine. Look what's happening in the Middle East as well. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less, and we need to advance defence spending, because if we don't, it will actually impact on our economy. Yeah. We have this bizarre situation because the electorate themselves don't necessarily see the connection, direct connection between our strong defence and looking after our economy. We even have this line at the moment, which I'm not sure where Labour stands on, that we will increase defence spending when our economy, to 2.5%, when our economy starts to improve. Our economy will not improve if the global security situation starts to deteriorate or continues to deteriorate.
Well, how would you fill that black hole, Luke? You're Shadow Defence Minister.
I mean, this is a really disturbing report because it shows this massive black hole, but not just this black hole in budget. It shows that decisions needed to get the equipment, the capabilities we need, have been delayed deliberately until after the general election to put off difficult decisions. Now, I'm very worried because I agree with Tobias. We are in more uncertain times. That's why Labour's been very clear that we'll support our armed forces, we'll invest in the new capability and kit we need, but we need to see the state of it. And that's why we'll commission a defence review on day one of a Labour government to look at where the capability gaps are, how we match the threats that our country is facing to the resources that we have. And with the smallest army since Napoleonic times, huge capability gaps.
But you're not going to spend any more or invest any more than you've said, the Tory spending plans at the moment. Is that the right priority, defence?
It is extraordinary to me, the double standards that the Tories have on this, because when it comes to defence, well, we've just got to pour more and more money into it. Any other sector, be it health, be it education, no, we've got to slam the spending brakes on. I mean, I'm not qualified to judge what the defence industry needs or defence sector needs and what the defence sector doesn't, but I know that the health sector, the education sector, many, many other public services are desperately short of funding that they are not getting. I also know that the greatest security risk we all face now is Earth systems collapse, and that is being driven by the failure to shift from fossil fuels to renewables and other technologies. We'll be coming on to that later. But that's partly driven in this country by cuts across the board in ways where we could be spending money far more effectively to reduce our contribution to climate breakdown.
Can I quickly come back on that? I actually agree with you, but we've embraced globalisation arguably more so than other nations. If we don't have access to international markets, then our economy, our prosperity will suffer. That means there'll be less money for education, for health, for all these other departments.
Are you equating the defence budget with access to international markets? Is this gunboat diplomacy that you're talking about?
It's not gunboat diplomacy. It's making sure that our world, working with our allies, is secure. And from where I sit, our world has actually entered a very dangerous era where the new alliances are forming. Behind Hamas sits Iran. Behind Iran sits Russia. Behind Russia sits China. And the global south are sitting back. Authoritarianism across the world is growing. The West is declining. That's what's happening to our world. That's what will affect our economy.
We're going to talk about immigration. Let me just show you this BBC News headline: minimum worker visa salary to rise under legal migration curbs. The government is expected to set out plans to reduce figures for legal migration. It hit a record high of 745,000 during 2022. Let's find out more from our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. What are you expecting to hear beyond this minimum worker visa salary?
Quite a significant package of measures, I think, Jo. There is that minimum salary threshold, which we think could increase quite substantially. Obviously, the question of to what extent it increases will potentially have quite significant effects for how many people then come to the UK subsequently. But other things we're expecting include curbs on the number of dependents, family members basically, that some immigrants can bring to the UK, perhaps measures designed to reduce the number of dependents that specifically some students can bring to the UK, and also potentially, and I think this could prove quite controversial, ways of trying to reduce the number of people who come to the UK specifically to work in the social care sector.
Right. Henry, that is legal migration, and things like social care are on that shortage occupations list. We're also expecting an update on plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda following the Supreme Court ruling. What more can you tell us on that?
That's right. Both legal and illegal migration have been really sore issues for Rishi Sunak, always, but especially in the past few weeks. And it looks like we'll get movement on both of them this week, because on the illegal migration asylum policy side, it sounds like the government's plan B to get its Rwanda policy going, or really a sort of plan B to get plan A working, is progressing quite fast. What we know is part of the government's plan is to upgrade the current agreement it has with Rwanda into a treaty, and potentially James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, could be out in Rwanda signing that treaty as soon as this week. And the other thing that we're hearing is that as part of that deal, in an attempt to reassure the courts, the UK courts, about how this scheme would operate, you might see UK government lawyers out in Rwanda helping Rwandan judges and other officials to process these asylum claims.
Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. When will the first plane take off for Rwanda?
I don't know.
Will it ever take off?
That I don't know. But to put it into context, the Supreme Court made it very, very clear that it wasn't the concept of sending people to Rwanda that was the problem.
To a third country?
To a third country.
It was about sending them to Rwanda.
Indeed, to Rwanda at this point. It was what Rwanda would do, the guarantees to make sure that those migrants were then not moved back to the original country they came from. This is why a new treaty is now coming to the fore. But you've also heard James Cleverly say it's just one part of a wider jigsaw.
It's not the be-all and end-all.
Well, I hope that's the case, because going back to the point that we were, I hope, agreeing on earlier, is the fact that the growth of migration isn't just a challenge for the UK, it's also for France, Germany and other countries. Look at the source of where these countries are coming from. Because we've absented ourselves from Yemen, from Somalia, from Libya, from Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria. This is where these places, people are coming from. They're turning their backs on these states. If we did more to help the challenges at source... No, if we help more to put the fires out at source, these people wouldn't be wanting to leave those countries in the first place. On top of that, I'm afraid climate change is going to see biblical movements of people from, I'm afraid, Africa, where desertization is going to cause real problems, to Europe. So the Rwanda issue is not going to solve everything.
So you're a fan? You think it's a good idea?
I'm not a fan. I was very, very sceptical of it. Right. It's designed to be a deterrent, but it simply cannot deal with the scale of numbers that we're dealing with.
Right.
We need to work with our international partners.
Do you think planes will ever take off for Rwanda?
I'm not sure it will. I mean, they consistently get thwarted by the courts. It's something that I'm increasingly worried about. I think having such a legal intervention in every single democratic decision made by a democratically elected country is an increasing problem. You see that with our infrastructure projects. You see that with the Rwanda plan. Every time you want to get a big, significantly critical infrastructure project up here in the UK, it goes straight to judicial review. And that's a problem. There is a problem here in the UK with the law intervening too heavily with decisions that are supposed to be political decisions.
What do you make of what Lucy says?
The Rwanda plan was never designed to work. It's just a performative way of beating up some of the most vulnerable and traumatised people on earth in order to distract from the government's failings right across the board. And of course it's not going to work. The Supreme Court has laid out why it's not going to work. It's not just the ECHR that it's going to conflict with. There's loads of international treaties. Rwanda is not a safe destination for asylum seekers. That's been made abundantly clear. Can I just add, I'd just like to put this on record, that I severely object to the idea that Tobias put forward that the reason people are fleeing from Afghanistan and Iraq is because we absented ourselves from those places. We completely messed them up with our atrocious wars in those countries.
Well, Tobias.
I'm not sure why you're disagreeing with me. I agree with you. I'm saying we left those places when we should have had the commitment, the staying power, the courage to make sure that we support these places. When they become governance, collapses, when security then dissipates, the people there will not feel unsafe and want to go elsewhere. There's a lack of international cohesion in dealing with the challenges that are here today, but also which will be compounded as they come over the horizon.
Right.
We destroyed their security.
I'm not going to dwell on Rwanda with you because we know where Labour stands. You wouldn't support a policy of sending asylum seekers
it's a terrible policy.
to Rwanda, even if it were proven to be a success. So let's talk about legal.
It can't be a success. It's only going to take 100 people at best every year. We've got 175,000 people in the backlog. It is utterly a failed policy designed to keep the Tories' right-wing base distracted while they collapse the rest of the system. £8 million a day we spend on hotels. It's not going to work. We've already spent 140 million on this failed policy.
I said I wasn't
going to
spend
any more.
We know the position.
But it wasn't a success.
We know the position
not a success.
you're in. Let's talk about the curbs to legal migration that we are expecting. Would you support this curb, a required minimum annual salary of £35,000 a year in order to receive a work visa? At the moment, it's in the sort of late 20s.
Well, Labour said that we'll need to have a look at some of the thresholds around where the salary caps are. I can't make that policy on your screen here, but we've said we'll look at thresholds. What we do need to do, though, is not pretend that looking at thresholds or looking at the shortage occupation subject deals with the main problem here, that we haven't invested in skills in the UK.
Fine.
So especially in shortage
But you have
subjects.
said, various of your colleagues have said you want to see overall figures come down. In fact, Darren Jones said, ideally, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that he would like to see net migration in the mid-200,000s. So these are ways the government is suggesting that you bring that figure down. Whether you believe them or not is another thing. Those working in social care shouldn't be allowed to bring dependents to the UK. Would you back that?
Well, I think this just collapses large chunks of social care. It's already in crisis. I want to see the detail of what the government's proposing here. But the idea that suddenly we can magic up social care workers when we're not getting them from abroad, I'm afraid is for the birds.
Right.
That's why we need to invest in skills. That's why Labour's saying at the heart of the problem here, after 13 years, why are there still occupations on the shortage occupation list after 13 years? It's because there's been no investment in skills over those 13 years. That's the solution as to how we make this a better, fairer economy.
Well, in fact, the number's gone up. There are even more sort of areas of work on that shortage occupation list. Do you support those sorts of curbs?
Can we wait for the details? But we know this report is coming out. There's some difficult questions that need to be answered here, and social care is one of the big ones. How do you make sure that we have that workforce to make sure that we can look after our population?
So is that realistic, capping the number of visas for people working in social care? Wouldn't that lead to a crisis?
Well, as I say, we're now preempting what's going to happen. I just wanted to sort of link in with the ECHR because there's been a bit of debate on my side of the party here. The idea that we would even consider leaving this is something that Churchill helped, was one of the architects. We are crafters and supporters, upholders of international law. We don't run away from it. A lot of these laws, these treaties were created after the Second World War, require updating. Then let's lead that call to update them. Let's rally with our other neighbours. Germany and France are facing these same issues as well. But we don't run away from it. We don't chuck it in the bin. That would just be...
Well, you're very clear. You're very clear. What is your message, then, to quite a significant number of your Conservative colleagues who think that is the only way that those flights will take off to Rwanda, is to disapply parts of the European Convention on Human Rights or ignore it altogether?
So it goes to, again, the legal aspect of this is to do with the status of the refugee, which is not clear in the actual...
are they wrong,
colleagues? It's not that they're... well, they are wrong that we should try and leave it. That would just, as I say, the message that was sent on the international stage of who Britain is in modern day and age, particularly when we just said that our world is sliding into a very, very bad place. We need to be upholding international law.
Lucy?
I'm looking at this and I do see the Conservative Party trying to find some answers and some solutions, but I haven't yet seen any solutions from Labour. as to how are they going to stop the boats. You know,
Really? We've announced a plan months ago on this,
I don't
Lucy.
see anything that would actually be effective. I'm looking.
I'm very happy answering that.
I'm looking at the Conservatives. At least they have something in mind. They're coming up with creative ideas. It's a difficult position to be in.
So I appreciate that as a group founded by Liz Truss, you have to take a Tory line. But our plan on this is published. You can Google it afterwards. It's to have a cross-border police unit to crack down on the criminal gangs behind this. It's to deal with a huge backlog. That's meaning we're spending £8 million a day by hiring 1,000 extra caseworkers to remove that backlog, which takes out that hotel spend.
Would that not increase the cost?
No, it absolutely wouldn't. It would save money by not having people.
How much money is it
by
going
not
to save?
having people waiting in hotels for an asylum case that no longer takes a 90% processing in a year as it was in 2015, but now only 10% get processed. There's an entire clear plan here. So let's sink that nonsense that we don't have a plan. The government's one is failing. The government should adopt Labour's plan today, and if they did, they'd start reducing the backlog, reducing the hotel bills, and ending this nonsense.
They are reducing the hotel bills with a few more bills to employ people to process them.
Save money.
Let's talk about COP28. Headline in The Guardian. George, COP28 president says there is no science behind demands for phase-out of fossil fuels. It was an event with Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland and a former UN Special Envoy for Climate Change. The COP president, Sultan Al-Jaber, claimed there is no science indicating a phase-out of fossil fuels is needed to restrict global heating to 1.5 Celsius. What did you make of it?
COP president, who in other news is chief executive of the UAE oil company. It's the most extraordinary conflict of interest. He said that he would be independent and objective. He wouldn't allow his oil interests to interfere with his views as COP president. Clearly, he has not been able to wash the oil stain off his hands. And what we're seeing here is classic fossil fuel industry rhetoric, where they say, we don't know of any evidence, we can't see a plan. I call it the Nelson Gambit. It's putting the telescope up to your missing eye and saying, I can't see anything. There's a massive, vast weight of scientific evidence showing how this can be done, which he is ignoring. Now, there have been some pretty uninspiring presidents of these COP meetings, but no one ever so manifestly unsuited to the role as Sultan Al-Jaber.
What did you make of those remarks, Lucy?
I mean, there was always going to be a transition. There was always going to be a conversation of how do we get from a high carbon economy into a lower one. So we always knew that that was going to be the case. I think investing in technologies that are actually green, such as nuclear power, would be the way around it. I don't think we should be focused on necessarily high carbon energies, but certainly nuclear power is one of them. And that's something that the growth budget has within its ideas, is that investing in these things, agreeing them, getting them through the door faster is a way to inadvertently get around these bigger issues on green energy and net zero. Net zero, is a great concept. I think there is something about it that's inspired lots of, entrepreneurism and how we get around these big problems, and it is a big problem. However, how do we start using things in a more effective way? How do we start getting, moving away from our dependency on oil and coal and all of these different areas and diversifying and increasing competition?
Well, how do we do that?
Well, I mean, none of these are new questions. We've been dealing with them for a very long time. The first thing you do is to reduce demand in ways which are actually beneficial for people. So, for example, government is currently spending across 2 years £78 billion in subsidising people's fuel bills, their home fuel bills. If it spent £8 billion, it could insulate the 3 million homes most in need. So this is an appalling false economy. It's such an outrageous false economy that you have to wonder what's going on here if it's not just giving the whole policy field to the fossil fuel companies. That's what it looks like.
There is a question around cost, and I know that this is the big meal at the moment, is how do we get that low carbon economy up and running whilst making sure that the costs don't get passed on to ordinary people.
But it's cheaper. It's actually a lot cheaper
but there is,
to install modern technologies and to insulate people's homes than it is to continue subsidising fossil fuels in the way that we are. It's cheaper for householders. It's cheaper for the government. There is no good financial reason not to do it. The reasons are political. The reasons are, as Al Gore says, that the government is in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry.
Well, whether we like it or not, it has increased. I mean, there's lots of reasons why there's been an increase in, cost of energy. Obviously Ukraine and supply and what have not. But there is also an increase on subsidies to many different kinds of companies,
Renewables
whether they're
are much
renewables
cheaper than fossil fuels.
Well, actually, I mean, I think if you look at the long term and looking at how we sort of prioritise and moralise the situation in a way, how do you look at, say, for example, the moral of the story around nuclear power stations? You know, surely that would be the better investment, because not only do you get green energy, you get more bang for your buck long term. It's stable. You get energy security. All of this makes sense.
I'm not anti-nuclear.
That's good.
But you seem to be anti-renewables. And you seem
Certainly
to be promoting.
Not. No, I think,
you seem to be promoting
I think it's about having
continuation
I think
of
it's about having a good balance of cost to the consumer
and
increasing competition. I think it's a great idea, but
if you want to reduce
the
costs,
price
switch to
for
renewables.
ordinary
Let's talk about the political claim that George is pointing to. The HuffPost, Al Gore, you heard him in the headlines, suggests UK government in the pocket of fossil fuel industry, hence continuing to grant licences in exploration of oil and gas, something the Labour Party supports for now. Do you agree with Al Gore?
Well, firstly, can I say that Sultan Al-Jaber's comments, I think, have overshadowed what I think was moving in the right direction. You go back to Paris 2015, and I think global warming was moving to 3.7%. We're now down to 2.3%, target 1.5%. We're heading in the right direction. Greater collaboration, that's what's happening. And if I looked at the charts today, what's keeping our lights on today? The energy mix, 1/3 of it is offshore wind. Who's invested in that? It's actually the United Arab Emirates. They're doing a lot of work around the world. Absolutely right. We need to transition. We have long-term targets. What we're missing, which ties into your question, is what are we doing on a yearly basis, a 5-yearly basis, a decade basis? We switched over to an agreement on phasing out diesel and so forth because we matched actually what Germany, France and the continent was doing. So we're in parity there. But we need to move faster, absolutely. This is the biggest existential threat that our planet faces. And we see Cumbria, example, the extreme weather patterns. Go back to our armed forces. They're not going to be able to cope within 5 years as to where this is heading. It needs to be taken more seriously.
Is Rishi Sunak in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry?
I'm not sure he's necessarily in the pocket, but he's certainly delivering all the policies they want. And that's the worrying trend here, because we do need to see...
Why are you going to reverse this idea?
Hang on a minute, you agreed.
Yeah, well,
you agreed
certainly on
with these licences in the north.
So, sorry, two different questions. Let me try and answer one of them. On the new licences, we are not going to take away permission for someone who's already undertaking work. But what we have said is that we won't be granting any new ones. And so that's the very clear stance there. But we've also said that we'll be investing £28 billion a year in the clean energy transition, in our clean...
Right. Is that a principled position to say that we'll go along with what the government is doing, even if we don't agree with it, until and unless we win power?
It's not just unprincipled, it's pathetic. We're in the midst of a climate emergency. And you say, oh, well, just because, we've started it, we've got to finish it. Sorry, no, we don't need to finish it. Because if we finish the allocation of new licences, we help to finish the habitable space on planet Earth. This is far, far more important than any investment that the oil and gas industry might lay down. We have to deprioritise those investments and prioritise the habitability of the only planet that
I do agree.
support
That's
us.
why we're not granting any new licences when we take, if we were to be lucky enough to be elected next year.
But you have to cancel the old ones.
We're not having any new licences granted under a Labour government.
But what the science says is you have to leave existing fossil fuel reserves in the ground. That means you have to cancel the existing ones.
So we've said very clearly we're not granting any new ones, and we're transitioning at pace for the rest of the economy with £28 billion a year by the midway point in our parliament. But I agree that climate change is the biggest crisis that we're facing. That's why Labour's got a clear plan on it. That's why we want to accelerate the transition, and we have to accelerate the transition, which A, recognises there needs to be one, and be clear about everything from home insulation, which I agree with you. I want a street-by-street retrofit of homes. Absolutely the only essential way to cut bills and cut carbon emissions. We have to transition our energy.
Yeah.
But Labour's in favour of a mixed energy policy with new nuclear and a fast-paced acceleration towards more renewables. These are the projects that will be funded from some of that £28 billion a year and from a changing government policy
and just still
move us towards.
Yes or no, that £28 billion?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
By
by midway through
the
Parliament, we are, yes.
Let's talk on this theme a little bit more about about water. A BBC investigation has revealed how water companies can make sewage pollution disappear from the official figures. Here's the headline. BBC News: water firm wrongly downgraded pollution events, documents suggest. Yes, these are leaked documents obtained by Panorama suggesting that United Utilities, which covers the Northwest, wrongly downgraded dozens of pollution incidents last year. The Environment Agency signed off all of the downgrades without attending any of the incidents. Let's have a listen to this whistleblower explain what's been going on.
Water companies are downgrading them, but it's done with the approval of the Environment Agency.
An insider from the Environment Agency has also agreed to talk. They could be sacked for speaking out, so their words are spoken by an actor.
So if you're not turning up, then who's calling the shots?
United Utilities, we dance to their tune. So that they say attend, which is incredibly rare, we'll attend. If they say don't attend, we don't attend.
So they're effectively marking their own homework?
They're effectively regulating themselves. They control the evidence.
Now, United Utilities says it's false to suggest they misreport pollution incidents and that the final categorisations are decided by the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency says some monitoring can be done remotely. It responds to all incidents and always attends the most serious. You can see Panorama, the water pollution cover-up on iPlayer now or on BBC One at 8 o'clock this evening. Is the system working, George?
It's just a complete catastrophe. The Environment Agency has been cut, demoralised, until it's almost incapable of regulating. I myself found a horrendous incident of pollution in a river. It had wiped out 2 miles of the river, reported it to the Environment Agency. They came back and said, we've decided not to take action. And I said, what does a farmer have to do? Detonate an atom bomb to get prosecuted. And they said, well, so we found no evidence of a fish kill. I said, there haven't been any fish living in this river for 6 months because they all got wiped out by the pollution. Any excuse not to take action. And the latest excuse is that if it's a Category 4 incident, then they don't even investigate. But how do they know whether it's a Category 4 incident or not? They rely on the water companies to tell them. And so we've got this massive black hole where regulation ought to be.
Is the system working, Lucy?
I mean, it seems not. If you have a look at another third party, which is essentially a quango, marking its own homework, you know, we have to start asking the roles of how they are regulated themselves. Would it just not be better to bring it back in-house and, you know, have the responsibility directly correlated with government, rather than constantly going to these third parties and asking their opinions? I don't think it's appropriate. Right.
Well, let's just get a personal experience from somebody, a surfer, who became extremely ill from possibly pollution in the sea. Ruben Santa can join us. Tell us briefly what happened to you.
Hi, I got a middle ear infection after surfing in potentially polluted water, which resulted in like really loud tinnitus in one side. Told to stay out of water for a month and take antibiotics. I did that, and then I got in the water after a month. That progressed to an inner ear infection, potentially from sewage again, called labyrinthitis. So this causes rotational vertigo, vomiting, hearing loss, and tinnitus. It usually clears up after a few months. However, mine didn't for various reasons and has progressed into a chronic condition called Meniere's disease, which is all of those previous symptoms, but over a long period of time. So this happened November last year, and I've kind of been dealing with those symptoms ever since, to be honest.
Can you be sure that it was caused by polluted water?
No, I can't be sure. However, so Surfers Against Sewage produce a map of all the UK swimming and surfing spots, or a lot of them, and you can check the water quality in that area. I didn't really know this at the time, and I checked water quality after I had been surfing and saw that the spot was polluted. So it's impossible to prove. However, it's quite likely that was the cause. The initial nurse that I saw and the doctor and the ear, nose and throat consultant all thought it could be due to sewage.
Tobias, what do you say to Ruben listening to his story?
Yeah, very sympathetic. Bournemouth is known for its surfing as well. I know the Surfers Against Sewage, they do some great work in raising this issue. It's a lot to do with the monitoring. I get alerts all the time, every time it rains, to say that there is a potential sewage problem. But last year, 2022, there was just a cumulative 2 hours worth of actual sewage pouring wrongly into the sea. But I get these alerts all the time. So getting the data, the sensors, so we're now placing sensors on the end of the piers so surfers can see directly as to whether or not there is any sewage at all. But it doesn't dismiss the fact that we need to be doing more. We have invested more, but what we're seeing with the Environment Agency is that they shouldn't be marking their own homework. And I do hope that the Department of Environment will look carefully as to how things can improve. This is unacceptable.
But do you think the government's failed to hold water companies to account?
Well, clearly more needs to be done. This is absolutely wrong. People shouldn't be getting ill. And certainly we shouldn't hear about rivers where an Environment Agency specialist turns up and says, there's nothing I can do here. This does need to be looked at.
It's water privatisation is at the heart of this. It's been a total catastrophe. The water companies have split incentives. On the one hand, they're meant to be delivering public services. On the other hand, they're meant to be delivering private profits. And guess which one they've prioritised? They've drained £72 billion in dividends out of the system since privatisation. In fact, the only pipes which work reliably are the ones which pump money into shareholders' pockets.
I should say that Ofwat has now been granted greater powers because they provide oversight here as well. The fines were originally limited to 250 million, I think. That's now been scrapped as well. I do hope this will lead to huge changes that are seriously required.
Should it be nationalised?
I don't think spending £100 billion when we're so short and we've got collapsing public services, renationalising is the immediate priority. But tomorrow in the Commons, Labour's tabling a motion that's calling for additional powers for Ofwat to be able to remove the bonuses from those water company executives who are routinely spilling in a criminal way sewage into our waterways. We also want to make sure that we're having every water outfall monitored because there's far too much routine discharge. I think all of us get that after really bad weather, our water system might not be able to handle the volume, but routinely on a day-to-day basis, that is not acceptable. And just before I came on here, I had an email saying that one of our local sewage works in Plymouth is now spewing out raw sewage into our bathing waters that we have there. As a regular wild swimmer, I use the Surface Against Sewage app that Ruben mentioned. It's essential to work out what you're swimming in. And the difficulty we've got at the moment is if you look around the coast of the country, on nearly every weekend, there's real crosses on the app that says, don't swim there, there's pollution there. We've got to get this cleaned up, and that's what we plan to do.
Well, will you support Labour's plan, removing the bonuses?
For the Environment Minister to look at those plans in detail. I should say that I've lobbied...
You can say if you support the idea of removing bonuses.
Well, I support the idea of absolutely better censoring and placing pressure on our water companies. I've met Wessex Water a number of times and demanded that we put sensors on the end of our piers so surfers can have real-time information as to what's going on. They are now coming into effect.
Right. I mean, the cost of retrofitting the whole country, this is in terms of repairing sewage pipes and dealing with dirty rainwater, it would cost 100 to 200 billion pounds. Would you support retrofitting the whole system?
Well, we've certainly said in the growth budget that if you increase infrastructure investment by 1.4% over the course of the next 20 years, it's a long time, yes, but we are saying that there should be a little bit more investment into these things. It will create an amount of growth, but it's something that it has to be done.
Well, a little bit more investment. It sounds like a lot of investment's needed.
Actually, the government figures are more than that. They're 450 to 650 billion.
Right.
So
what, three times as high.
That's
Ruben, what do you make of what you've heard, Ruben?
I think the sensors that you can see on the Surface Against Sewage app are really helpful, and it is really sad when you see red crosses all over the country. However, what is worse is in wintertime, I was checking this morning, a lot of them aren't just red crosses, they're just turned off because for some reason the sensors are allowed to be turned off out of season. However, winter is the time when there is more surf and there is more pollution. I think that's kind of crazy.
Right. Are you able to surf now? Do you go back into the water?
I do go, yeah. I actually checked this morning. However, it's red crosses everywhere and half the monitors are turned off anyway. So I won't be getting in today. OK,
Ruben Santa, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, consumers are facing an increase in bills of £156 a year to pay for improvements. Is that legitimate? Yes or no?
Well, they could do it by investing properly in their pipelines, which they're choosing not to do at the moment.
That's all we have time for. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live. But thank you to all of our guests here for joining me today. Bye-bye.